I'm Sheila Pryor. I'm Regional Director for Member Support for AMVA Regions 3 and 4, and I will be your moderator for this session. We are going to hear what the bad guys are up to in regards to internal fraud and what the good guys are doing to fight that. Our panelists today are John Kuo, who is the Administrator of the Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration and a member of the AMVA Board of Directors. Lilio Duarte, to his left, is Commander of Internal Investigations with the California DMV. Up next, you've heard from him already today, Mike Robertson is Director of North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles and AMVA's Chair of the Board. Steve Sebastian is the Manager of AMVA's Fraudulent Document Recognition Program. And rounding out our panel is Keith Fowler, National Program Manager of the Office of Investigations, Identity and Benefit Fraud Unit, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I always ask him how big his business card is. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This group is kind of an add-on to about a year or so ago, AMVA's Internal Fraud Working Group published a best practices document on the detection and deterrence of internal fraud. Show of hands, how many people have seen that document? Okay, it is available on the AMVA website, and it gives tips and suggestions for what you can do on an operational level as well as on an IT level to try to detect and deter fraud. So if you haven't seen that document, I urge you to go to the AMVA website and take a look at it. John, let's start with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Did I wake everybody up? All right, that's good. All right, Sheila has always been very good about making sure that we stay on track with these presentations. As you can see, there's 5 speakers on this panel, and we have roughly about 60 minutes to get through 5 speakers. So we each have 10 minutes each. But somehow, even though she gave us very strict directions, I still came up with a 25-slide presentation. So I computed, that gives me about 25 seconds per slide. So here we go. Actually, unbeknownst to my friend and buddy here, Keith Fowler from DHS ICE, the rest of the panel got together and said that, Sheila, can you put Keith on last? Because if you put him on first, none of us are going to have a chance to really get through our presentations. So I'm sorry, Keith. So let's make this easy. Let's have a show of hands. How many of you in this room do not think you have fraud going on in your jurisdiction? Okay, good. That's wait a minute. Were you standing up?
I'll check and see if anybody raised their hand.
Oh, okay. I thought you were standing up. No. All right, so that's a good sign because that makes our jobs much easier as part of the panel because our job is to make sure that you understand there is fraud going on in your jurisdiction because if you haven't seen the fraud yourselves personally, you just haven't looked in the right places. So get your head out of the sand is what we would like to say. Let me see if I can do this right. Okay. I was formerly chair of the Internal Fraud Working Group, and here's the previous working group members from each of the regions. We had Sean Sheeky from New Jersey, and of course Carmen Eldred from Kansas. As we like to say, Carmen has now crossed over to the dark side, right? Yeah, so. And of course Tom Edwards from California, and we have somebody else from California today, and Doris Bernay, who is now retired from Arkansas, and of course Sheila Pryor and Fred Pryor from AMVA, who has played a very important role in... Fred Porter, I'm sorry. Fred Porter. Oh, we're off to a really good start, okay. Sorry about that, Fred. I'll buy you a drink later, okay? All right. I said Sheila Pryor. All right. And what's not on this list is obviously, let me make up to Keith here. Keith was an honorary advisory member of this internal fraud, a very important member of the internal fraud working group. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we can establish a partnership with DHS ICE, in a little bit. All right, I'm already taking up more than 25 seconds a slide here. So, do we really need to talk about fraud? The answer is obviously yes. Once upon a time, the acronyms FBI, DHS, ICE, they just raises your eyebrow. Why do we want to partner with these type of agencies? And as you can see, as we progress through this presentation, you can practice what the 3 monkeys do: see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. But hopefully none of you do that because you just admitted that you do have fraud in your jurisdictions. All right, the internal fraud working group's goals are very simple. As Sheila mentioned earlier, we were to develop a best practices guide. And basically, the best practices guide is just lessons that every jurisdiction has learned and what they have done to curtail, prevent fraud going on in your respective jurisdictions, whether it be external fraud or internal fraud. And we actually came up with this best practice guide in record time. And that's also as a result because we had a small working group and we wanted to get something out there because it's been a while since we had a best practice guide for curtailing internal fraud especially. And as you now know, the internal fraud working group is now evolving into an external fraud working group, which I'm sure Amber you'll be hearing more of. Now, a little bit of history very quickly. This is obviously back home in Maryland where I'm from. We were known as Easy MVA, and in the customer service sense, that's a good thing. In the, obviously, document world, it's a very, very bad thing. We were known as Easy MVA because people were coming from all over the country to get their driver licenses and ID cards from us. Prior to 2009, back especially during the 2006-2007 timeframe, before we had the appropriate lawful presence requirement for driver license and ID cards, this was an actual picture of what was going on in all of our branch offices on a statewide basis. People were coming in and lining up before we opened our offices in the morning and basically trying to apply for ID cards and driver licenses. And even what's on the right-hand side, basically, is a snapshot of people coming in from out of state. We were taking pictures of cars in the parking lots with all out-of-state tags, and everybody was applying from their home state jurisdiction coming to Maryland to apply for DL and ID card. And I think all of you know this, motor vehicle treasure chest. This is our treasure chest. What do we do that's so valuable? We have driver license and ID cards. As all of you know, the driver license and ID cards has become the de facto identification of choice for all residents of the United States, all Americans. Commercial driver licenses, vehicle titles, vehicle registration plates, vehicle stickers, obviously, and of course, disabled parking placards. Now, the next several slides I'm going to go through very, very quickly because I have to stay on my time cue. Only 5 minutes left already? Jeez. Okay, these are just examples of fraudulent documents that we've come across. Social Security cards, obviously, and no placentes, or for those of you that don't know, Social Security cards have all kinds of security features on it. There's intaglio print, which is raised ink that can be felt. There's the, when you put it under black light, the seal and certain placentas should fluoresce under the UV light, etc. And this is all fraudulent documents that we come across on our front lines. Counterfeit with Virgin Island birth certificates. These are some examples of counterfeits from the Virgin Islands that we come across. Again, we look for the specific security features. And in some of these cases, once again, you put under black light, security features are not going to be present. And, of course, home state. We also come across altered birth certificates. The most evident thing that we come across, you see smudges on these documents. That's the first giveaway that the document's been altered. And they do that purposely to throw our frontline people off. And in this particular case, they actually cut out the name and put in a different identity and different name. Additional samples of altered Maryland birth certificates. And obviously this process is going to get better as EVE comes online with electronic verification of vital documents. And but at this stage, if you look at this particular document, usually in the Maryland birth certificate in the serial code, which circle, oops, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong thing. In the upper left-hand column there, it actually gives you a birth year, and you can see the number 58. So this person, for some reason or another, altered it and made themselves a little bit older than what this birth certificate serial number indicates. So that's a dead giveaway. So fraud is a problem. I've been doing this presentation for roughly over the course of the last 3 years, and continuously, this is just samples of what's transpired over the course of the last 12 months. As you can see, this occurs everywhere. No state jurisdiction is immune to fraud, either internal fraud, over-the-counter, or external fraud that comes across the counter. External fraud typically links to internal fraud because, once again, in my home state, we've experienced external fraud linked to our internal employees perpetrating those internal fraud. And it's one of the primary reasons why we had to solicit all of our partnerships with federal authorities. Additional examples of fraudulent Maryland licenses that we've come across, either they're counterfeits or fraudulently obtained and issued by one of our employees. And that's what we have done from the standpoint of instituting zero-tolerance policies to ensure that this doesn't continue. This is just a comparison of what's authentic Maryland driver license on the left-hand side and the counterfeit that's on the right-hand side. And the counterfeit operators are getting better and better. They can actually produce various security features pretty close to what we have, but they're not quite close enough. You can still see the distinct differences in some of the counterfeit operations compared to the authentic. Just additional here, you can see on the left-hand upper one, in our state, the administrator or commissioner's signatures are required in our state. You can see it's clearly missing on the upper left-hand sample. And the bottom one, if you look at the signature of the administrator, it doesn't reflect any administrator that's previously worked in Maryland. So we don't know where they came up with that one. So security features that we typically train our front lines to look for from a fraudulent or a valid one. This one, you can see the two-dimensional barcode clearly will now reflect the information that's on the front of the license. Okay. And this is an example of training bulletins that our law enforcement agencies all receive from us. And this is all law enforcement officers are trained to look and compare what a genuine Maryland product looks like versus what's fraudulent. And as you can see, some of the security features getting pretty darn good. Still don't think you got fraud? All right. Forget the picture for a moment there, but look at the signature. All right. This gentleman came in and signed his name as Homer Simpson. All right. And you can see the other graphics that he signed after his signature. I think it looks like a marijuana plant. And but obviously our frontline employees actually let this one get away, but we caught it on the back end as part of our quality assurance check. And here's a progression. This gentleman came in every single year to get an update on his license. And look how he's changed over the course of 5 short years. And so obviously this license has been voided out, and now he's been charged with misrepresentation. Okay. Fraud is a constant threat. That's the message we want to make sure that you get away from, you carry away as a result of this panel discussion today. It's an increasing economic value of the identity theft, increasing reliance on DLID for proof of identity, and the street value. We've had individuals that we have prosecuted that were selling authentic driver licenses for upwards of $3,000 a piece. So you can get rich pretty darn quick, So you got to make sure that you have instituted various measures internally to prevent internal fraud. And some of the recommendations as part of the internal fraud working group is make sure that you have senior executive management support, because a lot of things that you have to do without the senior executive management support, you're not going to be able to institute policy changes or the additional checks and measures that you need to curtail the fraud. Maryland lessons learned. Federal law enforcement agencies have enormous depth of resources. And this is the important piece I want to make sure that you carry away from this discussion as well. Once upon a time, we would not have dreamed of establishing partnerships with DHS ICE. Now we have an unbreakable bond with DHS ICE because they have resources that they can bring to help you carry out investigations and prosecute individuals with federal charges to make sure that we shut those counterfeit operations and criminal rings down. And that's the importance of making sure that you understand the importance of partnering with our federal partners. Checks and balances, more is better. This is just a quick sample of what we have done, and from a quality assurance and internal audit standpoint, zero tolerance is the message. And this is just a picture of every new employee orientation group comes through my office, and they get a talk to from the executive team on our zero tolerance. And we kind of give them a quick scare, a 5-minute scare, and we show them a DHS video regarding what can happen to them if they perpetrate internal fraud. And as a result of everything that we have done, we have seen our driver license and ID over-the-counter fraud drop from I didn't put numbers on this, but at one point in time, we had 300% growth in internal fraud. Now it's down to negligible. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lilia Duarte. I am the commander of California DMVs Investigations Division Special Operations Command. I oversee 4 internal affair offices in the state of California. I'm going to go ahead and start this presentation with a little video. This presentation is not for publication. I will be putting something together later for the AMVA audience.
Bad boys, what you want, what you want, what you gonna do when Sheriff John Brown come for you? Tell me what you wanna do, what you gonna do? Yeah. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? When you were 8 and you had bad traits, you go to school and learn the golden rule. So why are you acting like a bloody fool? If you get hot, then you must get cool. Bad boys, what you gonna do? Or what you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? Or what you gonna do when they come for you? You chuck it on that one, you chuck it on this one, you chuck it on your mother and you chuck it on your father, you chuck it on your brother and you chuck it on your sister, you chuck it on that one and you chuck it on me. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Hopefully you enjoyed that little clip there. That video was made by our Field Operations Division. This last year, our department has put together various fraud mitigation initiatives. The Field Office Division, you all in the field have been, in our department, have been working together to identify what they can do in the field office to mitigate fraud. We were working together with them in identifying what we can implement in the field level without utilizing the investigators, the law enforcement, just what you can do in the field office to mitigate fraud. Then they asked for a couple of photos of our enforcement operations, and they came up with that video. So I went ahead and borrowed it for this presentation. This is a little bit about the Investigations Division. The California Division of Investigations has 360 staff. 220 are sworn peace officers. We have 36 district offices in California. The Special Operations Command oversees the Internal Affairs Branch, which is 4 offices in the state of California. Within that branch, my branch, we have our non-sworn section. That section is our Internal Analysis Unit, our Confidential Records Unit, and our Computer Forensic Team. So 50% of my staff is the non-sworn staff that is dedicated to identify instances of fraud and to mitigate that fraud. As you can see, this slide, it just represents that California is one of the top 5 populous states in the nation. Last year alone, we serviced nearly 50 million transactions, driver's license and registration. Of the driver's license transactions, actual individuals that came into the field office was approximately 9 million people. Of that, our branch, the Internal Affairs Office, reviewed 800,000 driver's licenses last year alone. In the next few slides, I'm going to review 3 cases, one of which that we worked with the local California Highway Patrol, one that we partnered with DHS ICE, and another one that we worked individually. First, I'm running through this slide, is the basic steps that we put into place with regard to the verification of the legal presence and Social Security documents. In our position is that one of the basic things that the states can do is to implement the online verification of your legal presence documents and your Social Security numbers. In addition, we also implemented the new Secure ID, which is pictured there in this slide. This is just general 4 categories of employee misconduct as outlined there. And if you look at the internal fraud deterrence best practices that was published by AMVA, as you can see here, I have my little note clips, and it's a very valuable document. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that document. because it does identify the categories of fraud, the basic steps that you can implement to mitigate fraud, and it's a very valuable document. The first case I'm going to present to you today is a case regarding tidal washing. We titled this case Operation Tidal Wave. In this case, the DMV managers were critical to this investigation. This investigation came to us as the managers in the field offices identified a high number of high-valued vehicles that the registered owner and the legal owner was being removed. And what we found was that there was a ring of employees connected to an auto theft ring who were bringing in documents and fraudulently removing the registered owner's name and the legal owner's name. We charged a total of 7 suspects. It was estimated about $4.5 million in fraud, and the end result was that restitution was ordered in the amount of $1.4 million by our 2 employees and 1 broker. Unfortunately for these individuals, we have our 2 employees that later pled out to multiple felony charges. They received 2 and 3 years in state prison, and the broker received 5 years in state prison. The second case that I'm presenting to you very quickly today is a case that we are currently working with DHS ICE in Central California. On this case, we have identified 1 employee who was working with a number of primary brokers and mini brokers. And unfortunately, this employee and these brokers were issuing commercial and non-commercial driver's licenses to individuals primarily who had legal presence in the United States, but their legal presence had expired. I just received shortly an email message that the United States Attorney has just negotiated a plea with one of the mini brokers, and sentencing will be following up, and that the mini broker will be receiving upwards of 5 years in prison. Our employee is Alfonso Casares. This was a published event in the media, therefore I could share it with you today. We served multiple search warrants on the employee and 2 brokers. Working with ICE, ICE has provided us much resources with regards to additional manpower who possess language skills that we did not have within our own ranks, as well as buy money for the undercover operations. The next case wasn't as huge as the other 2 that I shared with you. This case was actually quite simple. This case was brought to us by the San Bernardino Police Department, who retrieved a wallet from a fleeing suspect, and that wallet contained 2 driver's licenses. What we found here was, in searching out those 2 driver's licenses, we identified that this employee had changed the identity of the suspect and actually compromised the identity of a California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation officer, thus compromising his identity. Through the investigation, we utilized some investigative techniques in the use of the Facebook. We identified that the suspect and our employee had Facebook accounts, and we looked through it, and they all had shared some mutual photographs of each other at parties. And so we were able to connect their relationship, and we showed that to the victim, our CDCR victim, whose identity was compromised, and he was able to identify that he in fact went to high school with this employee and with the suspects. This case wasn't as enormous in terms of the transactions that was involved. However, the fact that she purposefully and in conspiracy with these individuals compromised the identity of a few of these victims resulted in a conviction and 3 years state prison. I was asked in an interview for the article in AMVA's Move magazine, what can the states in the nation do who do not have a law enforcement investigations division do to mitigate fraud? And what would I say is the most important thing that a State Department can do? And I would identify that communication is the most important thing that we can do to mitigate and fight fraud. I believe that if we, whether sworn or non-sworn, communicate within our departments and identify those trends, those suspicious indicators, and move that up the chain of command to your directorate level, and then work together to identify how is it that we can resolve those potential compromises. In addition, communication with your law enforcement in your state, and then also with the feds, with DHS ICE, with FBI, with your state attorney general's office is very invaluable, as well as presenting to them your subject matter experts and share with them how the system can be compromised. You know, we all have auto theft task force. We have various task forces in the state of California. I would submit to you that if you were to send a subject matter expert in your driver's license or your DL field just to visit them and provide them an introduction into the process, that you would assist them in identifying and probably making several criminal cases. There's various investigative methods that were utilized in these different cases. Of course, we have our covert operations, we have our undercover operations, we have our search warrants. Right now, we see a very high trend in cell phone use. We are finding that many suspects are talking between each other in the cell phones, and so we are fortunate because we do have a computer forensic team, so we can seize, pursuant to search warrants, cell phones, and do immediate forensics and identify that information within those cell phones that actually make many of our cases. But one very important investigative method is, again, talking to the DMV, talking to you all who work in the Department of Motor Vehicles, who are the non-sworn experts of the process, because identifying the process and understanding the process and where that process is compromised is vital to a criminal case and is vital to closing the gaps in fraud. You could do it. Again, just basically trying to share the message that if you have an investigative team that is sworn or if you do not, you are able to make the case. You are able to examine your processes, and you could put together a case as a non-sworn team, submit it to your partners in law enforcement, and work together to address and to charge those unfortunate instances of employee misconduct. Again, my name is Lilia Duarte, Commander of the California DMV Investigations Division, Internal Affairs. Thank you.
Okay, just for the record, I sold Keith 3 minutes of my time. I got $8. So while we sitting here, I got another report. I'll tell you about that one in a minute. No PowerPoint. I came from a law enforcement background, 40 years worth of it. And when I came to DMV, I was not afraid of three-letter words like FBI and ICE and those things. I always sort of liked them and liked to use their assets. Most of you know the history of some of the DMV stuff in North Carolina. We went through some federal grand jury investigations and some rather nasty stuff, and some supervisors who like to take money from insurance companies and pull federal time because of it, but that's just what happens. John stole some of my stuff. Those of you who think you don't have fraud, y'all need to go ahead and get up and go on out the back door. Or either listen real good, because trust me, you do. I decided not to do the PowerPoint because I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories. Start out one at driver's license office, $750 a pop. Keith knows about this one. His guys helped us work it. And when you're paying $750 a pop for driver's license and the U.S. Attorney wants you to get 5 good undercover buys, you need to use their money. Because trust me, you as DMV administrators haven't got that much undercover money laying around. But that's part of that. That's a cheap way of talking about their assets, but they do have more resources than we do. This particular individual was making appointments. He was faking driver's license. We found out we had a system problem. We've got an old COBOL mainframe. You can go through that 3270 terminal emulation screening. If you don't pass the one just after Social Security verification, it don't make a record. So what this guy was doing is getting good Puerto Rican Social Security numbers. He'd run them in the system first, and if it passed, he'd issue him an ID card. They'd come back 2 weeks later, and they'd get him a for real North Carolina driver's license that's as good as anybody's in the country's. He's in jail. But continuing with what ICE was doing, it's still ongoing investigation. It went out of state using brokers, and it led to stolen vehicles and guns going overseas to terrorists. So go figure, that's your driver's license office putting this stuff out. You think that your vehicle registration group is just to do tags and titles and stuff like that? It's not just for transportation anymore. Another North Carolina story we made the paper 2 weeks ago had an insurance agent who just thought she would write on anybody's company, anywhere, anytime. She'd never seen an Allstate office, but she'd give you a binder with Allstate on it. And we titled 1,147 vehicles fraudulently. Got to cancel 1,147 transactions and try to find these people and find these cars. The sorry part about that is when they're out there driving, they have no insurance. The registration's not valid, and they probably don't have a valid driver's license. So think about that if it hits your wife or your husband or your kids or runs into that school bus. Records changes within your computer system. This is why you need to get your IT people to start doing some little friendly audits, looking around to see what's happening. And everybody up here has talked about communications and how you get the people working around each other to talk to each other. The records changes we found so far have been for money, but a lot of it's for friends and relatives. Somebody down the street, I got this DUI, I really would like to have it gone. Well, I guarantee you, if you've got a mainframe, somebody can get into it. Some programmer somewhere has got a backdoor key to get into it, and somebody that you trust can change that record, whether it's an issue date or take this out or change that hearing date, and you'll find some of all of it somewhere within your system. One of the things that I found, you said 5 minutes yet, she hadn't waved at me yet. One of the things I found inherently within DMV, and it's in this book that you've got here in the little introduction, well, Commissioner, that's the way we've always done it. And I finally told him, you say that to me one more time, you're going to be looking for a job. If people do it the way they've always done it, they got bad information to start with, and they just keep on doing it. They take things out of your computer system. They waive fines that they can't waive. They let a piece of paper slide because, 5 years ago, Maggie said I could do that, and I don't really need that I don't need that birth certificate. So they let that one slip. And then they find out the next guy's, well, if you let mine slip like you did their slip, I'll give you $100. That's the way it works. Those of you who are responsible for the emissions program, you say, emissions? What's he going to talk about emissions? Air quality. Everybody needs to breathe nice air, but what they're doing when they try to bypass your emission system is get a document that they can use later to title that stolen vehicle. We've got great big Escalades that come in here, and we catch them normally on clean scan. You're faking one PCM for another one. You got two vehicles there. I've had some tag agencies actually take some inspection verification as part of the title documents. Don't ask me how they do it, but they'll try anything once. But once you get that thing into your computer system as a live vehicle, it can go almost anywhere. We've recovered a lot of stolen vehicles through our emissions program. That's something you can take home to look at to see if that's something you can find. We talk to ICE and we talk to the FBI and we use the federal assets, but you have got a great resource right there at home. You DMV administrators need to get out and talk to your local police. Talk to your local sheriffs. I ran alcohol law enforcement agency for 5 years. If none of you have ever worked 18 years old that want to buy beer and alcohol, you don't know how many fake driver's licenses you can find. We put on two-week-long schools at alcohol law enforcement on fraudulent ID. So, well, that's what we ought to be doing. Well, we partnered with them. When I was at ALE, I came to DMV and I said, I need you to give me about 100 driver's licenses. And we took them and we faked them. We do the old scratch off, change the dates of birth, and do it the simple way that you can feel with your finger. They're much more sophisticated now. But if you'll partner with your local law enforcement, find out where your problems are at. Find out where these college kids are going to buy their alcohol, because if he's got a good fake driver's license, he got it from somebody. And probably who he got it from is selling it to somebody else. It's not just the college kids. Think back about the history of what we've gone through here in the United States. The truck at Times Square was a salvage vehicle. Timothy McVeigh rented one. These people are not going to drive their own car and park it somewhere to do bad things with. All of us do the, I'm still looking. I'm going ahead. Waiting for Sheila to call time on me. All of us work these things, but all of us talk to our driver's license examiners and our frontline VR people. And they are literally your first line of defense. And I do the same threatening with my driver's license people. I go to every driver's license graduation except for the last two, and I had to go to the legislature. But I tell these people, when you issue that driver's license card, you're getting them a license, get on an airplane, open a checking account, go to a bank. And if you get a little gold star on it, you can go in a nuclear facility now and go to federal court. So that's what you need to keep in mind. And I guess what I'm doing is just stand up here telling you that you're doing a good job. We can do it better. And that book that she had there, I read it the day it came off the press. It's one of the best law enforcement vehicles, books, communications devices that I've seen in my career. ANVA staff did a great job along with the committees of putting that thing together, and you really ought to read it. I didn't see enough hands going up. Thanks. Let me tell my last one. I told you I'd tell you the last one I got. I told Keith earlier, we've got a guy who buys shirts. He fakes him a DMV arm patch. He walked in yesterday into a driver's license office. He brought 15 illegals with it. Left them in the parking lot in their vehicles, and he had charged them $1,500 a piece to get a driver's license. He went in the front door and out the back door. That's the third time he's got me, but we're going to catch him. Yesterday, he left 15 illegals sitting in the front door of my driver's license office in Fuquay Arena.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Sebastian. I'm the principal of Apex Consulting, and we are AMVA's partner in the Fraudulent Document Recognition Training Program. Apex Consulting manages the program, updates the program, and assists jurisdictions with implementation and disbursement of the FDR program. I want to talk just for a few minutes specifically about FDR and internal fraud. There have been some developments within the courseware that specifically address an internal fraud that I think will be a very useful tool for many of you. Before I do that, I did just want to very briefly talk about some of the latest updates for the 2012 version of FDR that were released on January 1st. I know many jurisdictions have already accessed it, but for those that have not had a chance to quite look at it in depth, I just wanted to cover a few of the things that you'll find in this latest release. The first is there's a full narration of all of the courseware, which I think is a big plus for many jurisdictions, and we've gotten some great feedback on having that additional feature. There's also an update-only module, which is great for refresher training. It covers those documents that have changed, that have been revised, that perhaps have been sunset since the last version of FDR. And it's only that material. So your employees no longer have to go through FDR in its entirety to be updated. They can simply go through the update module. So they'll have a great refresher module, take about 30 minutes each year to do. Critical document updates for this year are, as you can read, emergency security features, the 2011 Consular Report of Birth Abroad, all the way down to the sunset of the A-Series Canadian passport. So quite a bit of updated document information in FDR proper. There are also two pieces that I want to make special mention of. There is a jurisdiction-only supplement that addresses the high-quality counterfeits that many jurisdictions are seeing, with terrific input from Keith and the folks over at ICE, and a lot of help from the jurisdictions that are actually taking in the documents and are having their documents very well copied overseas. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the outfit ID Chief and all the havoc they're wreaking. We have one particular module that talks about the very specific examples of licenses that ID Chief is creating, along with some general guidelines that your frontline staff can use to identify high-quality counterfeits from any source, and some of the common things that those counterfeiters are missing. What I'm here to talk mostly about today is the jurisdiction-only internal fraud module. Thanks to all of the work, the great work of the Internal Fraud Working Group, input from ICE, input from the Fraudulent Document Recognition Maintenance Committee, chaired by Major Paul Steyer from Iowa, we're able to get a great amount of information aimed at that frontline staff person, whether that person is newly hired or has been there a long time, something that can be used year after year for in-service training that addresses internal fraud and that employee's role in preventing internal fraud. I thought I would go through and just give a couple of screenshots of some of the slides within the courseware. As I said, the courseware is fully narrated. We won't experience that today, and we won't get into all of the sub-slides of the material, but I just wanted to give a hint of what's contained in the new courseware. First, the contents of the entire module for those that might have trouble reading it. There's a review of the internal fraud concepts that were introduced in Level 1, definitions of the different kinds of internal fraud, examples of the types and spectrum of internal fraud, a good number of case studies, actual case studies submitted by our jurisdictions, the consequences of internal fraud to the employee, to the agency, and to society at large, an employee's responsibilities with regard to internal fraud, and it closes with a terrific video that was provided generously by Keith and ICE. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's about a 10-minute presentation in video format that Keith has shown at a number of AMVA conferences. I would urge you to get a look at it any way you can, either talking to Keith directly. I believe it's even on YouTube. It's a wonderful, wonderful video, and it's included as part of the internal fraud module. As I said, we begin just discussing what is internal fraud and the many things that it encompasses, so that front-level employee really starts to get an idea of just what their job responsibilities are and how critical their role is to public safety. Go through a number of case studies. As I said, these come directly from the jurisdictions, and the nice thing about the case studies, they're not giving away any secrets as to creating ideas about how fraud might be pulled off in your jurisdiction. But they're very pointed and really serve the purpose well. Again, as I said, we get into the consequences of internal fraud, the societal level, the agency level, the damage that can be done to the agency, and one item that's often overlooked, but the damage that happens to the employee that commits internal fraud and how their lives are ruined is really driven home in the text and particularly in that video that ICE provided. Talks about the responsibilities for your employees, what they need to do, being alert, the things they can look for to make sure that internal fraud is not occurring intentionally by some other staff member, to make sure that they're doing the right thing by reporting when they're approached by some outside party to commit fraud, and talks about the role the employee can have within the reporting process. And lastly, as I said, it concludes with the ICE video. This is just the first frame of that video. It is an excellent, excellent video and really hits home. During my days as a DMV administrator, I really wish I had a resource like that just for employees to be shown on a yearly basis and drive home just how devastating participating in internal fraud can be. Lastly, here's my contact information. If anyone would like to contact me about FDR, which is available from the AMVA website, it's available for download for jurisdiction members only. Please feel free to go to the website, download it, and distribute it throughout your agency in any number of formats. If there's any suggestions that you might have to improve FDR or any of the modules in particular, including the internal fraud module, please feel free to drop me a line. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It's great seeing so many friendly faces again. Been in the AMVA community the past couple of years, and really I came out of our Baltimore office, and that's why I had worked with John in the MVA for a number of years, battling internal fraud. I can't say it any better than what this panel has said, so I'm not even going to try to articulate any kind of thoughts that are different, but I mean, they were on point very much. One of the things, and a little background about ICE, I mean, for those who haven't worked with us, we have 6,700 federal agents, so we're the second largest agency. We're the largest investigative agency within the Department of Homeland Security, and we're in 42 countries right now. So if you think about Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or as it's called now, Homeland Security Investigations, we're under ICE now. You think of anything that touches the border. So we work a lot of drugs, we work a lot of child exploitation, violent gangs, etc. But one of the things that we work on a lot is identity and benefit fraud. That compromise, or it constitutes roughly 10% of our cases. So if you think about that, at any given time we have thousands, tens of thousands of investigations. DMV internal fraud constitutes a very, very small part of that. So anything that I say or anything that we're talking about, certainly the majority of DMV employees are good, hardworking, law-abiding citizens. But for those who aren't, or for those who choose to exploit their position of public trust for financial gain, well, we want to set a message of deterrence. And that's really what the Internal Fraud Working Group put out a best case practices document, which was excellent. Steve with fraudulent document recognition training. All kinds of programs are out there now. Why would you want to work with us? A couple of things. So Mike, I thought, summed it up pretty well. We have some assets, so whether it's for buy money, one of the other parts that I should mention is that we have asset sharing. So if we work collectively or collaboratively together on an investigation, and oftentimes our end goal is not just to put someone in jail, because that is a deterrent, but stripping profit motive is actually really where you hit criminals the hardest. You want to reduce the financial incentive. So i.e., if we arrest an employee, well, why should they keep $100,000 or $200,000 of ill-gotten gains? Why? If you're going to go to jail, and I don't know what the frontline employee makes, but if they're going to make $200,000 in 1 year, well, some would take that risk to do it. But if you don't take that money from them, then in essence, they've won. We have not completed our investigation. And that is an important part of what we do. So DMV administrators, I think, they have a battle both ways. You have to balance customer service, no doubt, that's very important in the DMV world, versus the security of the process, the documents themselves, the processes that are in place to issue the documents themselves. And I'm going to go over some things just at a high level. I'm not going to talk about specific cases right now. I'll talk about our involvement in some of these cases. But specifically, in DMV genuinely produced documents, that's what criminals want. Forget the counterfeit stuff. I mean, yes, there's always going to be a market for that. For the most part, that's aimed at the under 21 crowd who would like to drink illegally. The individuals that will pay between $2,000 and $10,000 apiece for a driver's license, those are criminals that are in society. Someone said it up here earlier, it allows you to blend into society, to travel freely. It confers status on you. In the absence of a national identification document, the driver license has more from its intended use as a document to be shown to lawfully operate and safely operate a motor vehicle to one that is required in many cases whether it's on your I-9 to obtain employment, to open a bank account, etc. So criminals like that. And the reason they like it, and I'll give a personal example, I was working a case before I went to headquarters. We stopped someone, a suspected narcotics transaction, saw the duffel bags go in and out of the trunks, stopped the person. I was thinking, this is great. We got a whole bunch of drugs. It's going to be fantastic. Well, out of the back pops $976,000. It's a lot of money, right? So when I approached the person, I said to him, hey, what about that money in the back? He said, what money? And when someone can say what money to walk away from $1 million, and the driver's license he showed me was him, we ran it, it was good, it was clean, it was his picture on it, it was not him, though. It was someone else's identity. He had obtained that through a corrupt DMV employee. The harm that that does, and we saw a video earlier, some of the risks that law enforcement officers take, you don't know who you're stopping in a vehicle, okay? So when you don't know and someone has a document and they know they're wanted, but you don't know that as the law enforcement officer, they may not like the government or they know they're wanted, and in that case, that person who had nearly $1 million, he was a fugitive. We didn't know that when we pulled him over. His license came back clean. It's not illegal, shockingly, to carry $1 million in the car. I mean, you can carry $1 million all day, every day if you want. If you want to abandon it, I'm going to take it and then give some to my DMV friends for our cases. But that being said, that is that is a Homeland Security issue, that's a law enforcement issue, and it's a highway safety issue. It's all of that in a driver's license right there. One of the things, and in that case, by the way, I should say this, and we talked about working with state, local, and federal agencies. If you work a case with us or any federal agency and someone gets arrested federally, there is no such thing as parole in the federal system. So if you hear about someone gets a 15-year sentence and they're out in 2 years because of prison overcrowding, well, that has been abolished in the federal system. It's called truth in sentencing. If you get a 15-year sentence, you'll probably do about 14 of that, and they'll give you a little bit of time off for good behavior, and they're not going to put you at a prison location that's close so your family can come visit. I'll show a picture of a person later. He's in Leavenworth, Kansas right now. He was a resident of Delaware. Now he's in Leavenworth. Sorry about his family trying to visit him. He got 17 years for DMV fraud. The last case we worked, the average sentence was 102 months. So think about that. 8.5 years, someone's going to go to jail. Those were the recipients of the licenses. Those were employees, etc. Okay, so again, we're trying to strip profit motive as well as have a deterrent to engage in that kind of behavior. I had written these thoughts down with time in mind. I'm not normally someone who speaks off a piece of paper, and I haven't even looked at it yet. And I forgot my glasses anyway, so I really can't read it, which is not good. But my handwriting is awful. So I'm trying to hit some high points on this. And I should probably change a slide, too, while I'm at it. John shamed me into doing a PowerPoint. If I would have known Mike earlier, he wasn't going to do one. I would have stood with him as well on that. But that being said, one of the things that we decided in 2009 when I went to headquarters was, look, what is our message going to be? How are we going to reach DMVs? Well, one of the things that we decided to do, and Steve had touched on this as well, is we created a poster, an informational brochure, and a video, a short 10-minute video. The video is intended to be utilized for employee ethics and orientation training. The poster and the brochure are intended to be displayed, whether it's in the DMV facilities. We're sort of morphing that out because nowhere on that poster did it say anything about DMV necessarily. It says stop identity and document fraud. All of those materials are available free. At this point now, we've disseminated out close to 1 million brochures, tens of thousands of posters, and lots of DVDs. I don't even have that number. So this is the person I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to not really have a natural segue, but I'm going to talk about some of our involvement in facial recognition technology. That technology is fantastic. It's emerging. A number of DMVs and other institutions are embracing it. One of the ways that we're detecting internal fraud, and I should say this as well, when I first started this, people thought, well, isn't that just largely limited to large urban areas, large cities? Isn't that where the fraud's going to be? Well, I can tell you, because I see it. I'm the program manager that oversees the entire, our involvement in DMVs. Some of our biggest cases are in places that you wouldn't even begin to imagine why they would be in a big case, in that particular state or city or location. So what I'm saying is, it's while it may not be all over the place, it is in every state. And so what these gentlemen and Lilia had discussed earlier is it is in every state, no matter what. So That is a case, if you look, this is what criminals will do. They'll walk in, they'll go 10 minutes apart. That's why I highlighted it. Same person, same day, 2 different employees. He gets a legitimate transaction, and then he goes and gets one in a totally made-up, assumed name. 10 minutes. That's facial recognition technology, and that obviously will help deter that kind of behavior, but that is what criminals will do. One of the things that we do like to charge as well is most people seek to obtain a driver's license in someone else's name if they can. For those that do, anyone should know this if they're working a case or if they have any involvement, which is every time someone obtains a license or an identity in that person's name, if they get it in my name and they use it to open a bank account or others, we can charge 2 years every time that they use that, bank account, job, etc. 2 adds up pretty quickly. I'm not going to talk about that. One of the things I do think I should mention is our involvement, and this is a little bit on the outside of the internal fraud, but I get asked about this really regularly. What do we do on the counterfeit side? So without talking about specific cases right now, there is an emergence in the quality of high-level counterfeit documents that are originating from overseas that are doing a lot of damage to DMVs right now, whether it's through the reciprocity agreements. And at this point in time, you say, well, it's just the under 21 crowd. Well, it's not the under 21 crowd necessarily anymore. Criminals know how to obtain these. These are much cheaper. They're available over the web. And I showed that picture because so on the far, that side, that's what the box looks like that it came in. On the other side, it's coming, and you can see when it's broken apart by Customs and Border Protection. So individuals are smuggling these types of products, this contraband, in ways that are very similar to narcotics trafficking and other forms of contraband. So that is really, and I did cite this as well from the 9/11 Commission report, just to leave it, is that I know I'm almost out of time, or maybe I am out of time right now. There's a lot I could talk about, and I would love to talk about, but for this, I just wanted to touch on a few of the highlighted parts on this piece of paper that I can read, frankly. So that's it at this